Here's 10 things we learned from the kickoff tournament in no particular order. Number 1. Viper is OP. Now most of you, of course, already knew this. Viper was incredibly strong for all of last year, and so this will come as no surprise that an unchanged Viper is still pretty strong. However, after the Sky changes, many thought that this might not be the case, that with the Sky nerf, which we'll get into a bit later, that maybe double controller as a whole would just see less pick rate, and that means that Viper's pick rate would go down. However, Viper's pick rate was as high as 81% in Americas, and even in the lowest in China, it was still 64%, which was still the most picked agent in that region as well. Overall, across all of the different regions, this puts Viper at about a mid-70s pick rate, which is similar to the peak chamber meta. And so yes, Viper is OP, and so with that, you can probably suspect that she will get some big nerf coming. There is one big caveat to that though, which is of course we're getting a new controller soon, and so Riot might wait a little bit of time just to see, has the new controller changed anything? Has Viper's pick rate come down with that? I really doubt it, because of course Viper kind of fulfills her own unique role in the game anyway, so I don't think that will happen. And if you're asking me what change should happen, then for me it has to be something about her fuel. The way the fuel works just makes her far too efficient and just means that you get more utility throughout a round than pretty much any other agent. Number 2. This year is more competitive than last year. Of course, last year we saw dominance, really, across the game from a few select teams from each region. For most of the year, Fnatic, Paper Rex, and Loud were the clear standout teams, with EG, of course, joining them somewhat in the second half of the year, and even teams like DRX did dominate as well in the Pacific League season earlier on in the year. This year, though, many of those hard hitters did not make it to Madrid. The new kind of super team of NRG, Fnatic of course, DRX, Navi as well. All teams that many expected to make it to Madrid have not gone. And there's new teams taking their place, like Gen G, Karmine Core, Team Heretics, and even Sentinels. China was really the only exception to this, where both EDG and FPX qualified, and it still seems like those are the dominant teams there, but hopefully this means that we will get good competition across the board for most of this year when it comes to qualifying and competing in international events. Number 3, the Outlaw was not overly used. And again, this is something that people might have known from just watching some of the earlier Tier 2 games, where the Outlaw purchase rate was kind of at a similar rate that it was in Tier 1, where sure, you will get it on second round buys after winning the pistol. That seems to be where it's most applicable and most used for the Outlaw. But even then, there wasn't necessarily always an Outlaw bought in those scenarios. There were some instances though of people using it against eco rounds later on in the half and getting good value from doing that, which is great, but the gun is not the dominant force that many people perhaps predicted when they first saw the gun and went, oh my god, this gun's insane. That seems like we aren't getting that kind of gun. There were also some teams trying a strategy that I myself kind of put out there of buying an Outlaw after losing the pistol round. This does mean that someone has no credits for when the third round comes around if you lose that round, but it can cause a potent threat on that second round because it means anyone buying a rifle and light shields all of a sudden becomes a one-shot kill. Number 4. The Sky nerf worked for the Initiator class. Last year, of course, we saw Sky kind of just dominate the scene as a whole as the double controller Sky meta came in, and Riot decided to give Sky all of these little small minor nerfs before eventually they decided, okay, it's time for Sky to die, and here's a massive nerf of taking away the regeneration on the birds. And as such, we've seen the other initiators come into play quite a lot more, which is great. And double controller comps can now have problems. They have some sort of weakness, and we have seen double controller comps with a breach instead, or with a Sova or a fade, and that all of a sudden means that maybe they don't have flashes, maybe they don't have a recon. It's good to have a double controller comp now that does have weaknesses. But importantly, it seems like a balance has been struck where Sky is still usable, but requires perhaps a bit more skill. There are some players I've noticed that are really quite good at still using Sky and having util available later on in the round, like Kicks from Vitality, I think is perhaps the best example, where he commonly seems to still know exactly when to use that utility and still has quite a bit of it going into the later parts of the round. Number 5, Tier 2 players can become superstars quickly. Again, this will be no great surprise to anyone who watched all of last year, where Demon 1 went from a completely unknown player to arguably the best player in the entire world. And so, of course, unknown or Tier 2 players can become superstars very quickly. But this year we've seen it already happening straight away. Players like Miniboo, Narrate, Martine, Junk UT, Benji Fishy have all risen from Tier 2 and become very integral or important players to their teams and are all going to Masters Tokyo. Then there's also Karen, who rose up from complete obscurity, not even necessarily in Tier 2, and has seemingly become one of the best controller players there is in the entire game. Now, it's interesting because we might expect less of this to happen as time goes on and teams start scouting the right players to actually be in Tier 1, because we all know that the last year of partnerships, there was a lot of maybe not the best rosters being constructed, and so maybe that will happen less and less, but of course it will still happen. Number 6, Yoru is a viable agent. Now again, this is one that's been coming for a little while. We saw even last year that Yoru can be a decent pick, and some teams like Sentinels did use it on maps like Bind and found decent success using Yoru. So perhaps this isn't completely unexpected, but having said that, in EMEA, Yoru's pick rate is higher than Jet's, which if you said to someone 2 years ago, they probably would have thought that the game is unrecognizable, because that is something that just could not happen. But now we're seeing Yoru get played at a pretty decent level, I must say, as well, with some insanely cool strats being built around him as well, and him finding success in a variety of comps on a variety of maps. Number 7, vibes matter. Obviously, having a good work culture is conducive to success pretty much in any line of work. But from the little snippets we've seen from teams in the off-season or some of the kickoff event as well, being a vibes guy might be a good way to get onto a team for a prospective player and then actually stay on that team. Players like Rossi for T1 or Zelsis for Sentinels, they might not top frag in most games, they aren't the IGLs of their teams either, but they bring energy and fun to the group, and it makes the whole team better, and those teams are doing pretty well. And this could be a lesson for future players, that you don't even need to be an IGL or the best aimer in the world. If you're a good, supportive, vocal person that can hold your own in terms of your aim duels, then you can probably have a decent chance of getting onto these teams just by being a really good teammate. Number 8, this map pool, it sucks. This might be the worst map pool we've seen in the history of Valorant, and I don't think that that's a particularly hot take either. I think quite a few people might agree with me. Icebox and Breeze, there's no easy way of saying this, I think they're just bad maps, and I really do hope that as we get more maps added into the game going into the future, that Riot just gives up on these maps and doesn't ever bring them back and doesn't try and make changes to them or anything like that. They just are given up on. Personally, that's what I'm hoping for. And whilst Ascent, of course, is not in that same level of Icebox and Breeze, of course, at the highest levels of the game in the pro meta, Ascent is very, very stale. And whilst we have seen more experimentation than we did in the past, most notably, of course, Loud and their crazy comp, it still, for the most part, sees too many kind of mirror matches and just a lot of things that we've seen before and is pretty stale. But there is a new map coming as teased in the new Battle Pass, and maybe we'll get a map rotation as well. So not all hope is lost. Hopefully by the time the next act starts, we'll get a new map and we'll also get a map rotation, and all of this can be fixed and we'll have a really good map pool instead. Number 9, the Gecko usage, not complete trolling. Now, for those of you who've been a fan of the channel for a while, you'll know that I've made videos in the past, multiple videos in the past, of pro players playing Gecko and being absolutely awful at playing that agent. But of course, in this kickoff tournament with the Skynuffs, we've seen more Gecko in general be played across the board. And whilst it's not been perfect to my eyes, and there are definitely things that I still think can be improved upon, it certainly has been better across the board. And I wouldn't go as far as saying that people are completely trolling on this agent like they used to in the past. And there have been certain notable players, like Sassy for instance, that have found consistent value from Gecko, particularly obviously on Sunset, where Sentinels have kind of been dominating. Gecko seems like a really good pick on that map, and players like Sassy have been finding a lot of value from it. And with that in mind, the Dizzy seems to be flashing people quite a lot, and maybe there are players that are just not that used yet to shooting the Dizzy flash, and so maybe that will come down as we go into the future, but I'm very happy to report that the Gecko usage is not troll. And finally, number 10, I've seen enough. Wolves Esports are winning champions. Spring has sprung, and if you thought Fnatic were a dynasty, then just you wait till Wolves dominate this scene forevermore. We all know that in the EDG game, that EDG got very lucky, that Wolves were robbed by the ref. We all know this to be true, and so with a more fair ref hopefully coming in to games in the future for Wolves, they will be an unstoppable force. They are coming for you, and spring has sprung.